It began like any other evening at Coastal Hearth Bistro, a place where Mrs. Eleanor Sutton had shared countless special moments. But as she stepped through the familiar doors, the warmth she expected was nowhere to be found. What unfolded next would challenge her resilience and reveal truths that no one in the room was prepared for. Stay tuned. It was a crisp, chilly evening as Mrs. Eleanor Sutton approached the glowing entrance of Coastal Hearth Bistro, a place that had become her sanctuary over the years. The bistro was more than just a restaurant. It was a space filled with memories. The worn oak beams in the ceiling seemed to whisper stories of her past visits, her anniversary dinners with her late husband, quiet lunches where she read her favorite books, and even that one stormy evening when she sat by the fireplace, savoring a warm apple tart. Tonight, however, felt different. Something in the air was amiss. Eleanor hesitated for a moment at the door, adjusting her scarf against the cold before stepping inside. She wanted tonight to be special. It was her birthday, after all. Inside, the familiar hum of conversation and clinking of glasses greeted her ears, but the warmth she usually felt upon entering was absent. The smiles of the staff, the friendly waves from familiar waiters, none of it was there. Instead, she was met with sidelong glances and cold indifference. Her chest tightened slightly, but she dismissed the feeling. Perhaps it was just a busy evening, she thought. Eleanor approached the counter, where a young man stood behind the register. He was a new face, one she didn't recognize. His posture was stiff, and he glanced up at her briefly before looking back at the notepad in his hand, his expression unreadable. "Good evening," Eleanor began, her voice soft yet steady. "I have a reservation under the name Sutton." The waiter didn't bother looking up this time. "There are no tables available," he said flatly. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. "I called yesterday and confirmed my reservation," she said, her tone still polite. "Could you check again, please?" The waiter sighed dramatically, the irritation evident in his posture as he set down the notepad. "I said there are no tables available," he repeated, this time with more force. "You should try somewhere else." The words stung, but Eleanor maintained her composure. "Perhaps I could wait by the counter until something opens up," she offered gently, hoping to diffuse the situation. The waiter smirked, crossing his arms. "There's nothing for you here," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You should leave." Eleanor felt the familiar pang in her chest, a feeling she had carried with her throughout her life. She had endured moments like this before, moments of quiet dismissal, of subtle judgment. As a child, she remembered being told she couldn't sit in certain places. As a young woman, she had been overlooked for promotions, her competence dismissed before it was even seen. Now, as an older woman, she faced a new kind of exclusion, one wrapped in the assumption that she didn't belong. She straightened her back slightly, refusing to let her dignity waver. "I'd like to speak to the manager," she said calmly. The waiter chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "The manager won't help you," he sneered. "You don't belong here." Those words hung in the air like a stone sinking into water, each syllable heavy with meaning. Eleanor took a deep breath, her hands steady, her expression composed. "I'll wait," she said simply. The waiter shrugged and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Eleanor standing alone at the counter. Around her, the other diners began to notice the tension. Whispers rippled through the room, some curious, others judgmental. A few patrons cast sympathetic glances her way, but no one spoke up. Eleanor stood her ground, the weight of her years of endurance pressing against her like a heavy coat. After what felt like an eternity, the manager emerged. He was a middle-aged man with a hurried gait, his expression a mix of irritation and forced professionalism. His eyes scanned the room before landing on Eleanor. Recognition flickered across his face, and his demeanor shifted. "Mrs. Sutton," he said, his tone faltering slightly. "I'm so sorry about the confusion. Let me find you a table right away." But Eleanor wasn't interested in being seated anymore. "Thank you," she said evenly. "But before we talk about a table, I think we need to address what just happened here." The manager glanced nervously at the young waiter, who had returned and was lingering near the edge of the room. The bravado that had laced the waiter's earlier actions was now gone, replaced by visible unease. His posture was slouched, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, as if trying to shield himself from the consequences of his actions. Eleanor's gaze remained steady. "What happened wasn't just a misunderstanding," she continued. "It was disrespectful, and I need to know why it was allowed." The manager stammered, searching for a response, but before he could say anything, the restaurant's front door swung open. A cold gust of air swept through the room as a tall, broad-shouldered man entered. It was Daniel Sutton, Eleanor's son and the owner of Coastal Hearth Bistro. The room seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's gaze swept across the scene, taking in his mother's calm yet resolute posture, the manager's flustered expression, and the waiter's discomfort. His jaw tightened. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "What's going on?" Eleanor didn't need to answer. The expressions on the staff's faces told Daniel everything he needed to know. Turning to the waiter, Daniel's tone hardened. "What did you say to her?" the young man stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. "You're fired," Daniel said coldly. "Get out." The waiter's face flushed red. For a moment, he looked like he might argue, but one glance at Daniel's expression silenced him. He grabbed his belongings and left, his footsteps echoing in the now silent restaurant. Daniel turned to the manager next. "And you," he said sharply, "how did this happen? My mother, my own mother, was treated like she didn't belong in her son's restaurant. This is unacceptable." The manager stammered an apology, his face pale. "It was a mistake," he said weakly. "It wasn't just a mistake," Daniel said, his voice firm. "It was a failure to uphold the values this restaurant was built on." Turning to the diners, Daniel's voice rose with conviction. "What happened here today was wrong," he said. "No one should ever feel unwelcome, here or anywhere else. I apologize to all of you for what you witnessed, and I promise you this will not happen again." The room erupted into applause. The incident didn't end there. In the days that followed, Daniel made sweeping changes to the restaurant's operations. He introduced mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all staff, implemented stricter hiring policies, and created an anonymous feedback system for customers and employees alike. The story of Eleanor's experience quickly spread, shared by patrons who had witnessed the confrontation. Social media buzzed with posts about the incident, many praising Daniel for his swift and decisive action. Others shared their own stories of facing discrimination, expressing hope that more businesses would take similar stands against prejudice. Eleanor watched the ripple effects of that evening with quiet pride. She had lived a life filled with challenges, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just about her. It was about standing up for dignity, for respect, and for a future where moments like this would no longer happen. For Daniel, the experience was a stark reminder of the responsibility he carried. Not just as a business owner, but as a leader in his community, he vowed to ensure that Coastal Hearth Bistro would always be a place where everyone felt welcome, no matter who they were or where they came from. And for the community, the incident became a symbol of hope, a reminder that change was possible when people refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment like this? Share your story in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation about creating spaces where everyone belongs.